Welcome, everybody, and thank you for being here. So, this session is called Safe and Sober, and today we will be talking about prevention when it comes to drug and alcohol impaired driving. Before we do get started, I do want to be clear from the start that this is not about telling anyone not to have fun or judging anyone. As college students, your life and your social life also should be really fun, and filled, with formals and mixers and game days and after parties. So this conversation is more so how you all can still have fun, but doing it in a way where you don't put anyone's life at risk and doing it safely. So we will start off with just introducing our program as well as our team. So our program is called Greenlight Long Beach. We are a program within the Long Beach Health Department that focus on prevention regarding distracted and impaired driving. But for today's focus, we will just be going over impaired driving. Here is our team. So our program manager is Cyro. Leonella is our program coordinator. My name is Sabrina, and I am the health educator. And with me today is also Rebecca, who will be doing the second portion of this presentation. This workshop is focused on awareness and safe decision making, not punishment, like I mentioned. The goal here is to reduce risk and prevent situations that could permanently impact someone's life. And here are some of the topics that we will be going over today. So, what exactly impaired driving is, how cannabis, alcohol, and medications can affect someone's ability to drive safely, some harm reduction strategies that work to keep you all safe, and then lastly, how you can all look out for your friends. Let's start with a quick poll. And that question reads, how do you usually get home after a social event? I know I'm not there to look at everyone's answer, so I'll just give you a few seconds to just think about it. Do you drive yourself? Do you ride with a friend? Do you use rideshare, so something like Uber or Lyft? Do you walk or scooter? Or does it just depend on the night, like you don't usually have a plan set? Okay, so after I give you some time to think about that, I'm not sure how many of you all chose that depends on the night. However, if you did, that is one of the most risky answers to, choose because you don't have a set plan. So that can lead to risky situations at the end of the night. Now, just a quick statistic and a reason why we are all here to provide this information to the specific age group is because a higher percentage of adults aged 21 to 25, which is at 15%, drive after taking drugs or drinking than do young adults aged 16 to 20, which is 7.5%, or adults that are 26 or older with that 7.7%. So, this age group is mostly affected by impaired driving, which is why it is important that we give you all this information. That way you can all make those safer choices. Now, going over that definition of what exactly impaired driving is. So, it is driving under the influence of legal or illegal substances. And it is important to note that it's not just alcohol. When we talk about impaired driving, there's other substances that can impair someone's ability to drive safely. And also important to keep in mind that when we're talking about impaired driving, we're not necessarily just talking about only people who are drunk or only people who are high. Impairment can also be someone who's buzzed or someone who's taken one or two hits of a blunt or a vape or whatever substance they are using. And impaired driving can also include having a slower reaction time, poor judgment, less coordination, reduced focus, and then also impairment affects how quickly you do respond to unexpected situations, why it is so important for someone to be 100% paying attention while they're driving. And then here are some other substances that impair someone's ability to drive safely. So like I mentioned, we don't just talk about alcohol here. We're also looking at things like medications, whether they're prescription medications or over-the-counter medications, as well as cannabis. Now we will be moving on and just focusing for right now on prescription and over the drug medications. So, why medications are or do have that ability to impair someone's driving is because um, of some of those harmful side effects that we will go over that they have. So, prescription drugs are commonly linked to drug driving crashes. In fact, in 2016, 19.7% of drivers who drove while under the influence tested positive for some type of opioid. And here are a list of commonly used over-the-counter and prescription drugs that can affect someone's ability to drive safely. So maybe you are not aware that these medications can affect someone's ability to drive safely, and you or someone else is taking these medications. So some of these medications include things like sleep aids, anxiety or pain medications, opioids, as well as allergy or cold medicine. And the reason being is because of those side effects that I did mention early on. So some of these side effects can include things like dizziness or drowsiness, having a slower reaction time, trouble focusing, nausea, muscle weakness, as well as vomiting, and that list can go on. So these high-risk situations can also include mixing these medications with other substances such as alcohol or cannabis, taking a new medication while you're taking a different medication, and also driving late at night. Now, here's an example of an over-the-counter medication. Before we go over this, I do want to let you all know and have, in mind that the phrase operating heavy machinery does also include cars. So even though if that label doesn't specifically say a motor vehicle or a car, that phrase of operating heavy machinery does include cars as well as other vehicles that are similar to cars. So things like forklifts or tractors, as well as other machines like those. So as you can see in that red arrow, it's pointing to one of those phrases that say, well, in this case, this one does say motor vehicle, so it says be careful when driving a motor vehicle or also operating heavy machinery. And then below that arrow, you can see those side effects that this medication causes. So in this case, this can cause nervousness, dizziness, or sleepiness. So obviously, someone that's taking this medication should not get behind the wheel while under the influence of this.
Tiger Woods arrest report.
Okay, so we will be watching a quick video in this next slide, and it's basically just an example of someone, so in this case Tiger Woods, who is a famous golfer who gets charged with a DUI because he is driving under the influence of prescription medications.
Tiger Woods arrest report reveals he was asleep behind the wheel of a car when he was arrested on suspicion of DUI.
And just within the past hour, we have learned that his vehicle had some sort of damage when he was found. The report says Woods was in his car with his brake lights on and a turn signal flashing. Police say they had to wake him up and that he was slurring his speech. The report also says Woods is on several prescriptions. Channel 4's Crystal Moyer spoke to a pharmacist about the dangerous side effects of some of those drugs.
Do you have any questions about your medication that I can answer for you?
Pharmacist Gary Roberts says people may not be aware of the side effects their medications can cause. Golf pro Tiger Woods blamed his DUI arrest on medications he was taking, including the painkiller Vicodin. Police found Woods asleep at the wheel Monday. His car was stopped and the engine running. Police said Woods' speech was extremely slow and slurred, and he appeared to be confused. He did take a breathalyzer and his blood alcohol level was 0.
Those are classic examples of adverse effects of medications, especially if there's more than one medication involved.
Even ingredients in over-the-counter medications can have serious side effects. One of the most common ingredients, antihistamines. It's found in things like Benadryl and other allergy relief medications, and it can cause drowsiness. Another ingredient to look out for is dextromethorphan. Many brands will identify it with a DM on the package. Robert says it can give the sensation of being high. Be sure to also keep track of how much cold and flu medicine you're taking. Brands like NyQuil have a large amount of alcohol in it, and combining different meds can create a dangerous cocktail.
They should try to get all their medications, if they can, from the same drugstore, because that way That pharmacist knows what interacts with what.
When in doubt, ask your pharmacist or doctor about the side effects. Many of the warnings are listed right on the package.
As you can see, the top warning is may cause drowsiness.
And with so many variables, each person may have a different reaction. So Roberts suggests those taking a new drug avoid driving until they know how it will affect them.
So now we will be going back and pivoting into our cannabis portion of this workshop. So I do want to note that cannabis is also the same thing as marijuana, weed, or pot. However, we just use the term cannabis because it is that scientific term. Now, after alcohol, cannabis is the drug that is most commonly found in the blood of drivers involved in crashes. In 2021, 11.7 million people drove under the influence of selected illicit drugs, and some of them were including cannabis. Now, cannabis is mostly known for that psychoactive effect that it creates. I'm including that relaxation effect or that effect of being high. But in doing and having those effects, it also impacts all of these different areas and parts of the brain. And that is because THC, which is a cannabinoid that is found in cannabis, causes all of these different impacts in the brain. Since THC is that psychoactive component in cannabis, we do have a different cannabinoid that is found in cannabis, which is called CBD. However, CBD is non-psychoactive, meaning it does not interfere with brain function and doesn't cause any of these effects like THC does. Here are different methods that people do use when they take cannabis. So the first one we'll go over is inhalation. Basically, some of the methods that people use are either blunts, bongs, vapes, etc. So when someone is inhaling cannabis, the onset time is between 10 to 15 minutes. The peak is around 30 minutes, and that high would last anywhere from 45 minutes to 3 hours. This just depends on someone's body, since everybody's body works differently. They have different metabolism rates. So some people might have a high that lasts a little bit longer than others. It also depends on how often someone does use cannabis. If they're a new user, it will definitely affect them longer as opposed to someone who uses it on a daily basis. Now, when looking at the oral method, we're talking about edibles. So anything from cookies, brownies, chips, there's also drinks that have THC in them. So this actually takes up to 2 hours for someone to start feeling the effects because it does have to go through their digestive system and be broken down. The peak can also depend, once again, on on the person's body, since everybody's body is different, like I mentioned, people have different metabolism rates. And then lastly, that high would last anywhere from 4 to 6 hours, once again, depending on that person. But as you can see, it does last longer than that inhalation method. So it's definitely important to keep in mind, especially if you are planning on driving after using things like edibles. You do have to wait to be on the safe side up to 10 hours after taking that edible to drive, as opposed to that inhalation method. Normally, it's around you have to wait after 6 hours to drive. And then lastly, we do have topicals. So like I did mention, there is CBD that is found in cannabis. So if someone is using something like a topical lotion, more so they do use this for pain relief or medicinal purposes. So they apply this lotion or spray on their skin and it absorbs. And most of the time, these topicals are only filled with CBD. They don't have THC in them. So if that is the case and someone's using something with 100% CBD, they are allowed to drive because, like I mentioned, CBD does not alter brain function since it is not psychoactive. And now we do have this chart which depicts the different ways that cannabis can affect people. So for some people, it can feel stimulating and act as a stimulant, leading to anxiety, mood swings, um, aggression, as well as nervousness. For others, it can, however, act as a depressant. So it can cause impairment in memory, judgment and coordination, paranoia, suicidal thoughts. And then at higher doses, cannabis can actually act as a hallucinogen, so causing aggressiveness, confusion, panic, or seeing or hearing things that are not there. So, because using cannabis can be unpredictable for a lot of people, it is why it is so dangerous to use because you never know how it will affect a person, aside from all of those other side effects that it has that we saw in those previous slides. Here are some common misconceptions that folks have when they think about driving under the influence of cannabis. So, for example, they believe that they drive better when they're high. They feel calm, so they think that they feel fine, or they obviously will say that they believe that it's safer than alcohol. However, this is not the case because when someone is under the influence of cannabis, their attention and focus switch. Their reaction time is affected because it does become slower, and then their perception of time and distance is also affected. So now, what does this mean when we're talking about driving? Well, they will have a slower response to hazards that are on the road. They will have difficulty staying in that lane and swerving in between lanes, which can obviously increase the chances of getting into a car crash. And they will also have delayed braking, which once again does increase those chances of getting into a car crash, as well as decision making. So a lot of the times, people do say that because they do have a decreased speed, like it shows on this chart, they drive, safer. However, always having a decreased speed is not a safer option, especially if they are on the highway where that speed is around 70 to 75. Someone can be driving at 30 to 40 miles, which increases the chances of getting into a collision because the cars behind them will be driving faster than they are. And similar, like I mentioned in the previous slide, the movement between lanes, they do take fewer risk-taking decisions. They have a larger following distance between that car in front of them and them, just because, like I mentioned, of that decreased speed. Their reaction time is slower, and then lastly, they are twice as likely to get into a collision versus someone who is driving sober. So next, we will be watching a video that explains how law enforcement, what law enforcement does look for when someone is driving under the influence of cannabis, since there's not an exact test like there is with alcohol, where they can just take a breathalyzer and see that they are under the influence. Sadly, for cannabis, they don't have a test right on the spot that they can test for, so they more so look at how a person is driving.
Let's look at some things that will make law enforcement notice you're driving. Here's a video that gives you some answers.
Law enforcement's looking for a lot of different things, such as intention problems, people staying stopped at green lights, people proceeding through yellow lights at an unsafe speed. Maintaining lane positions is a big one. Tailgating, unsafe lane changes, driving up on the curb. We're seeing people who drive too fast, maybe even drive too slow.
Okay, and then we do have two other videos. These two next videos show how having a normal reaction time is important. So this first video is of someone who has a normal reaction time, and then that second video is going to be how having a slower reaction time impacts driving ability.
Juan was at work one morning when traffic stopped for an accident up ahead. Another driver decided to go for the exit instead, but someone else didn't notice until it was too late. Fortunately, it looks like the other driver braked in time to prevent the accident from being too serious, but Tawan couldn't stop to check on them since he was already late for work. Juan was headed to
THC slows reaction time and impairs driving ability. Keep your high harmless and off the road.
Now, diving into a little bit more about microdosing. So we kind of touched a little bit about it without defining it earlier in the presentation. So microdosing is essentially consuming minimal amounts of an intoxicating substance. So any of those substances that we talked about in this presentation, so things like alcohol, cannabis, even medications. The reason why people do this is to get those effects without getting quote unquote too high or to maintain a functional high. However, if someone already feels different, they will drive different, even if it is the smallest amount of cannabis or just one drink of alcohol. That person is already impaired with that minimal amount of whatever it is that they are taking.
Next, let's talk about the effects of mixing drugs, including cannabis and alcohol. This is known as polyconsumption, the use of more than one drug taken together, either intentionally or unintentionally. Using cannabis and alcohol causes increased side effects, including slowed reaction time, loss of coordination and problem solving skills, impaired decision making skills, and distorted perception and peripheral vision. A study from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration in 2022 found that seriously or fatally injured users showed 19.9% tested positive for two or more categories of drugs, including alcohol. If alcohol is in your system, THC is absorbed much faster and intensifies impairment. So, if you find yourself or others saying, I can smoke and drink and be fine to drive, that is likely untrue because of the effects we mentioned 2 slides ago. Slowed reaction time, loss of coordination, and problem solving skills are all important for safe driving. And now we'll focus on alcohol, which remains the most common substance involved in impaired driving crashes. Why is alcohol important? Well, the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism estimates that 1,519 college students ages 18 to 24 die from alcohol related unintentional injuries, including car crashes. The 21 to 24-year-old age group had the highest percentage, 29%, of alcohol impaired drivers involved in fatal traffic crashes compared to other age groups in 2022. Driving impaired or driving under the influence of alcohol is defined as operating a motor vehicle with a blood alcohol content, BAC, greater than or equal to 0.08%. BAC can be measured by breath, blood, and urine. However, enforcement often uses breathalyzers due to their ease of use and quick results. Alcohol slows reaction time and affects decision making, even at lower levels. Many people underestimate how quickly impairment starts. A lot of crashes happen close to home, on familiar roads because people think, I know this route, I'm fine. Familiarity can actually increase risk, and buzz driving is still impaired driving. Let's take a look at what alcohol actually does to the body and why that matters when someone is driving. On the left side, you'll see the things alcohol affects first: reaction time, judgment, vision, and coordination. These are all skills your brain and body use constantly when you're behind the wheel, even if you don't think about them. When reaction time slows, it means it takes longer to hit the brakes or steer away from something unexpected. That could be a car stopping suddenly, a pedestrian stepping into the street, or a light changing. When judgment is affected, people are more likely to take risks, like speeding, following too closely, or thinking, I'm fine to drive. Alcohol can also affect vision, making it harder to notice hazards, especially at night. And when coordination is off, it can lead to things like drifting between lanes or overcorrecting when steering. What's important to understand is that alcohol doesn't just make people feel relaxed or social, it changes how quickly the brain processes information. These effects can start before someone feels drunk. That's why the key takeaway here is this: even small amounts of alcohol can impair driving. Feeling okay doesn't mean your brain and body are responding the way they need to on the road. The BAC limit varies for numerous reasons: different licenses, age, DUI probation status, and whether you are driving a person for hire. However, as you can see from this chart, impairment actually begins as soon as you have a drink. So just because you don't see the visible effects of alcohol doesn't mean you aren't impaired. As BAC rises, so does your loss of ability. It's also important to remember that the definition of a standard drink varies. A standard drink is defined as 12 ounces of 5% alcohol beer, 5 ounces of 12% alcohol wine, or 1.5 ounces of 80 proof or 40% alcohol liquor. The slide shows all examples of one standard drink. It's also important to keep in mind that not all drinks are the same, even within the same categories. For example, Craft beers often have more alcohol content and can be served in larger glasses. Wine alcohol content varies between 5 and 23% ABV, and red wines usually have higher alcohol content than white wines. And don't assume bartenders will always give you 1.5-ounce shot of 40% alcohol. Some might do more. And while that all sounds like a fun time, just be aware that you may be more intoxicated than you think. So, we've discussed how alcohol has different types and amounts that can affect your level of intoxication. What are some other factors? Well, overall, the individual is an important factor. First, body composition, including hormone levels, how much water you have, and body weight affect intoxication. For example, a person who has more muscle gets intoxicated more slowly than someone with less muscle. Your mood also affects intoxication. People who are fatigued or stressed become intoxicated more quickly than people who are rested and relaxed. Food and stomach. Food can help absorb alcohol or simply take up space, so that alcohol does not enter the blood through contact with the stomach wall. Speed of consumption. Simply, a person who drinks rapidly or gulps drinks becomes intoxicated faster than a person who sips or drinks slowly. Medication or drugs. Not only can alcohol and drugs increase the effects of each substance, they can also trigger dangerous reactions like poisoning or overdose. And lastly, carbonation plus sugars and juices also increase the rate of absorption. The pressure from carbonation in the stomach and small intestine forces alcohol to be absorbed more quickly. And the high sugar concentration in most juices accelerates stomach emptying, which means alcohol is absorbed faster in the small intestine. Next, we'll watch a quick video.
With alcohol in your system, smoking cannabis results in higher blood concentrations of THC and increased impairment. Alcohol and cannabis used in combination results in a synergistic effect with significantly increased risks of fatal crash involvement. Here are some comparisons of dangerous driving behaviors. AAA has been conducting studies on driving under the influence of alcohol for years. They conducted a survey with drivers who had consumed alcohol and cannabis in the past 30 days, but not necessarily at the same time. These numbers show that the drivers who consume both alcohol and cannabis are more of a risk on our roadways than drivers who consumed alcohol only. Here are some of the self-reported results of people who consumed alcohol only versus cannabis and alcohol. Speeding on residential streets, 35% versus 55%. Aggressive driving, 28% versus 52%. Intentional red light running, 32% versus 48%. And texting while driving, 21% versus 40%. With alcohol in your system, smoking cannabis results in higher blood concentrations of THC.
Another myth people say is, I can sober up fast and be okay to drive. The issue with that statement is that there's no way to speed up alcohol leaving the body. Remember what we said before, alcohol is metabolized by the liver, and this happens at a very constant rate, roughly an hour per standard drink. A cold shower, fresh air, exercise, or black coffee will not help a person sober up. Allowing the liver enough time to metabolize the alcohol is the only way to remove alcohol from the body. The liver metabolizes alcohol at a very constant rate, about an hour per drink, and about 5% of alcohol consumed leaves the body through urine, sweat glands, and breathing. Ask yourself this: what is the only thing that can help remove alcohol from the body? Is it A, black coffee, B, time, or C, fresh air? The answer is B, time.
Now that we've talked about what substances can impair your ability to drive safely, we will be going over the legal side of impaired driving, what the law says, and the real-world consequences. So as mentioned, just like drunk driving, driving under the influence of drugs is also a crime and illegal to do so. CHP has estimated the cost of a DUI to be around $13,500, And then aside from that fine, there can also be legal consequences for driving under the influence. So those consequences include things like felony or misdemeanor, license suspension, or it could get revoked, vehicle impoundment, it going on your criminal record, as well as having probation requirements or mandatory education classes. And then lastly, depending on how big the impact in the crash was and if anybody got hurt, you can get incarcerated either in county jail or state prison. So a lot of people do assume that e-bikes and e-scooters are a safer alternative if they've been drinking or using substances. However, that is not true. In fact, here in California, riding an e-scooter or an e-bike while under the influence of either alcohol or drugs is illegal, and the law treats these vehicles similarly to driving a car. If someone is impaired while riding either an e-scooter or e-bike, they can still be stopped by the law and charged with also a DUI. And then impairment does affect balance, reaction time, judgment, coordination, which is why it is actually more dangerous to ride these vehicles while impaired, because these vehicles do offer less protection than cars, so the risk of serious injury is actually higher. Now, a DUI can affect more than just your license, or it can be more than just a fine. It can also impact your education as well as your future. So, for students, consequences may include things like suspension or expulsion, loss of financial aid or scholarships, removal from sports teams if you are on a sport, or losing campus housing. Now, this would apply more if you are planning on going into a university that does have housing. A DUI can also limit career options in fields like healthcare, law, education, aviation, and even commercial driving. And then it can also show up on background checks. So anybody that does a background check on you can see if you did get a DUI in the past. So as you can see, one decision can have long-term consequences that are just beyond that of the road. Now, when it comes to your campus in particular, alcohol is not permitted on campus at any time, including the possession or consumption anywhere on LBCC property. Smoking of any kind, and this includes cigarettes and vapes, is prohibited inside all buildings and then also within 50 feet of entrances. Smoking is only allowed in designated smoking areas on campus. Now, remember that would just include cigarettes, because vaping cannabis or smoking cannabis is illegal unless you are in your private residence. So violations of this policy may result in disciplinary action, referral to support or rehabilitation programs, and in some cases, criminal penalties. College campuses are high-risk environments for impaired driving because we're not saying that people don't care, but it's more so because of the timing and the context. So most impaired driving crashes happen on short trips or often familiar roads as well. So even if that trip is 5 to 10 minutes long, or you memorize your way home already, that does not make it okay for you to drive while you're under the influence. Many of these incidents do happen when people think that they're almost home. So just make sure to keep that in mind when you are driving back home if you are impaired.
Let's talk about why adults use substances. For a lot of college students, stress is one of the biggest reasons people turn to alcohol or other substances. Many of you are balancing classes, exams, graduation requirements, jobs, family expectations, relationships, and social pressure, all at the same time. On top of that, there's constant digital noise from emails, notifications, and social media that makes it hard to truly shut off. Substances can sometimes feel like a quick way to relax, fall asleep, or escape stress for a moment. But that relief is temporary, and for some students, it can actually add more stress later, especially if it impacts grades, relationships, health, or safety. Stress itself doesn't mean someone is making bad choices. What really makes a difference is whether you have support and other ways, healthy ways to cope. That's why using campus resources, leaning on friends, and finding stress outlets that work for you are so important during college. Here are a few coping strategies to refrain from using substances. This one is called box breathing. Box breathing follows a four-part cycle, each lasting the same time. The four steps are inhale, breathe deeply through the nose for 4 seconds, hold your breath for 4 seconds, exhale, exhale slowly and fully through the mouth for 4 seconds, hold your breath again for 4 seconds. This is considered one box or cycle. The pattern is typically repeated for several minutes until you feel relaxed and centered. Everyone has their own coping strategies. It is important to make sure to practice and learn what works best for you as soon as possible. Up to this point, we focused on risks, and now I want to focus on solutions. What can you do to stay safe and avoid impaired driving? First, harm reduction before the event. When we talk about harm reduction, we're really talking about reducing risk, not judging choices or telling people what they should or shouldn't do. One of the most effective harm reduction strategies is planning before the event even starts, because once substances are involved, decision making gets harder. The first point here is deciding your ride ahead of time. That might mean choosing a sober driver, planning to use Uber or Lyft, taking a campus shuttle, or deciding to walk with a friend group. When you already know how you're getting home, you're less likely to make a risky decision later just because it feels easier. Next is setting sober driver expectations. If someone agrees to be the sober driver, it's important that expectations stay clear and respected. Changing that plan halfway through the night is one of the most common ways things go wrong. We also list eating beforehand. Food slows how quickly alcohol is absorbed, which can help reduce impairment. It doesn't make someone sober, but it does help the body process alcohol more safely. And finally, budgeting for transportation. Cost is one of the biggest reasons people decide to drive when they shouldn't. Planning ahead, whether that's splitting the ride or setting aside money, removes that pressure at the end of the night. The key idea here is simple. Planning early removes pressure later. When safety decisions are made ahead of time, they're easier to stick to. Harm reduction during and after. During the event, pacing yourself and avoiding mixing substances helps reduce risk. Checking in with friends matters, especially before leaving. After the event, safety should come before convenience or cost. Don't assume someone else has a ride figured out. A quick check in can prevent a risky situation. Which of these is the sober or designated driver? Is it A, someone who drinks or smokes the least? B, seems unimpaired? C, stops drinking or smoking 2 hours before driving? Or D, has zero drinks or drugs? The answer is D, has zero drinks or drugs. Let's go over our takeaways from this presentation. First is unlawful to drive under the influence of any impairing drug. Everyday medications can be impairing. Plan ahead if you are planning on using. If you or someone you know needs help related to alcohol or drugs, these organizations provide support without judgment. First, you're not alone. Everyone feels stressed sometimes. There's no right or wrong reason to ask for help. These resources are free, confidential, and available right here in Long Beach. You can call, text, or walk in, whatever feels easiest. If you're worried about yourself or a friend, reaching out sooner rather than later can really help. These are safe spaces to go to if you or someone you know needs help with alcohol, vaping, or drugs. You don't have to have all the answers, even just asking questions is okay. Talking to a trusted adult and using these resources can really help. Thank you so much for viewing our presentation. Please reach out to our email or website if you have any questions.